If you would be a real seeker after truth, it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt, as far as possible, all things. The only thing we have power over in the universe is our own thoughts. It is not enough to have a good mind. The main thing is to use it well. By God, I understand a substance which is infinite, independent, supremely intelligent, supremely powerful, and which created both myself and everything else that exists. All these attributes are such that, the more carefully I concentrate on them, the less possible it seems that they could have originated from me alone. So, from what has been said, it must be concluded that God necessarily exists. Omnia apudni mathematica fiant. The senses deceive from time to time, and it is prudent never to trust wholly those who have deceived us even once. Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the selfsame well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. Situations in life often permit no delay, and when we cannot determine the course which is certainly best, we must follow the one which is probably the best. This frame of mind freed me also from the repentance and remorse commonly felt by those vacillating individuals who are always seeking as worthwhile things which they later judge to be bad. The greatest minds are capable of the greatest vices as well as of the greatest virtues. Truths are more likely to be discovered by one man than by a nation. To live without philosophizing is in truth the same as keeping the eyes closed without attempting to open them. Wonder is the first of all the passions. Except our own thoughts, there is nothing absolutely in our power. If I simply refrain from making a judgment in cases where I do not perceive the truth with sufficient clarity and distinctness, then it is clear that I am behaving correctly and avoiding error. Mathematics is a more powerful instrument of knowledge than any other that has been bequeathed to us by human agency. Some years ago, I was struck by the large number of falsehoods that I had accepted as true in my childhood, and by the highly doubtful nature of the whole edifice that I had subsequently based on them. I realized that it was necessary, once in the course of my life, to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundations if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last. Each problem that I solved became a rule, which served afterwards to solve other problems. I have concluded the evident existence of God, and that my existence depends entirely on God in all the moments of my life, that I do not think that the human spirit may know anything with greater evidence and certitude. Traveling is almost like talking with those of other centuries. Intuition is the undoubting conception of a pure and attentive mind, which arises from the light of reason alone, and is more certain than deduction. And as it is the most generous souls who have most gratitude, it is those who have most pride, and who are most base and infirm, who most allow themselves to be carried away by anger and hatred. So far, I have been a spectator in this theater which is the world, but I am now about to mount the stage, and I come forward masked. Nothing is more fairly distributed than common sense. No one thinks he needs more of it than he already has. At last I will devote myself sincerely and without reservation to the general demolition of my opinions. But possibly I am something more than I suppose myself to be. It is best not to go on for great quest for truth. It will only make you miserable. Give me extension and motion, and I will construct the universe. The reading of all good books is indeed like a conversation with the noblest men of past centuries who were the authors of them, nay, a carefully studied conversation, in which they reveal to us none but the best of their thoughts. Perfect numbers like perfect men are very rare. Intuitive knowledge is an illumination of the soul, whereby it beholds in the light of God those things which it pleases Him to reveal to us by a direct impression of divine clearness. Before examining this more carefully and investigating its consequences, I want to dwell for a moment in the contemplation of God, to ponder His attributes in me, to see, admire, and adore the beauty of His boundless light, insofar as my clouded insight allows. Believing that the supreme happiness of the other life consists wholly of the contemplation of divine greatness, I now find that through less perfect contemplation of the same sort I can gain the greatest joy available in this life. But in my opinion, all things in nature occur mathematically. I am indeed amazed when I consider how weak my mind is and how prone to error. My third maxim was to try always to conquer myself rather than fortune, and to change my desires rather than the order of the world, and generally to accustom myself to believing that there is nothing entirely in our power except our thoughts, so that after we have done our best regarding things external to us, everything in which we do not succeed is for us absolutely impossible. In philosophy, when we make use of false principles, we depart the farther from the knowledge of truth and wisdom exactly in proportion to the care with which we cultivate them, and apply ourselves to the deduction of diverse consequences from them, thinking that we are philosophizing well, while we are only departing the farther from the truth, from which it must be inferred that they who have learned the least of all that has been hitherto distinguished by the name of philosophy are the most fitted for the apprehension of truth. Variant, when it is not in our power to follow what is true, we ought to follow what is most probable. The greatest minds, as they are capable of the highest excellencies, are open likewise to the greatest aberrations, and those who travel very slowly may yet make far greater progress, provided they keep always to the straight road, than those who, while they run, forsake it. Neither divine grace nor natural knowledge ever diminishes freedom. Divide each difficulty at hand into as many pieces as possible and as could be required to better solve them. For I found myself embarrassed with so many doubts and errors that it seemed to me that the effort to instruct myself had no effect other than increasing discovery of my own ignorance in the matter of a difficult question. It is more likely that the truth should have been discovered by the few than by the many. Let whoever can do so deceive me, he will never bring it about that I am nothing, so long as I continue to think I am something. The first precept was never to accept a thing as true until I knew it as such without a single doubt. If it is not in my power to arrive at the knowledge of any truth, I may at least do what is in my power, namely, suspend judgment. Instead, I ought to be grateful to him who never owed me anything for having been so generous to me, rather than think that he deprived me of those things or has taken away from me whatever he did not give me. The mind effortlessly and automatically takes in new ideas, which remain in limbo until verified or rejected by conscious, rational analysis. These long chains of perfectly simple and easy reasonings by means of which geometers are accustomed to carry out their most difficult demonstrations had led me to fancy that everything that can fall under human knowledge forms a similar sequence, and that so long as we avoid accepting as true what is not so, and always preserve the right order of deduction of one thing from another, there can be nothing too remote to be reached in the end, or too well hidden to be discovered. The two operations of our understanding, intuition and deduction, on which alone we have said we must rely in the acquisition of knowledge. The principal effect of the passions is that they incite and persuade the mind to will the events for which they prepared the body. Regard this body as a machine which, having been made by the hand of God, is incomparably better ordered than any machine that can be devised by man, and contains in itself movements more wonderful than those in any machine. It is for all practical purposes impossible for a machine to have enough organs to make it act in all the contingencies of life in the way in which our reason makes us act. What then is the source of my errors? They are owing simply to the fact that, since the will extends further than the intellect, I do not contain the will within the same boundaries, rather, I also extend it to things I do not understand. Because the will is indifferent in regard to such matters, it easily turns away from the true and the good, and in this way I am deceived and I sin. Now therefore, that my mind is free from all cares, and that I have obtained for myself assured leisure in peaceful solitude, I shall apply myself seriously and freely to the general destruction of all my former opinions. There is a great difference between mind and body insomuch as body is by nature always divisible, and the mind is entirely indivisible. Just as we believe by faith that the greatest happiness of the next life consists simply in the contemplation of this divine majesty, likewise we experience that we derive the greatest joy of which we are capable in this life from the same contemplation, even though it is much less perfect. A person has two passions for love and abhorrence. A big disposition to excessiveness has just a love, because it is more ardent and stronger. There is nothing so far removed from us as to be beyond our reach, or so hidden that we cannot discover it. Neither the true nor the false roots are always real, sometimes they are imaginary. That is, while we can always imagine as many roots for each equation as I have assigned, yet there is not always a definite quantity corresponding to each root we have imagined. Whatever I have up till now accepted as most true and assured, I have gotten either from the senses or through the senses. But from time to time I have found that the senses deceive, and it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. The principal use of prudence, of self-control, is that it teaches us to be masters of our passions, and to so control and guide them that the evils which they cause are quite bearable, and that we even derive joy from them all. I hope that posterity will judge me kindly, not only as to the things which I have explained, but also to those which I have intentionally omitted so as to leave to others the pleasure of discovery. Even those who have the weakest souls could acquire absolute mastery over all their passions if we employed sufficient ingenuity in training and guiding them. And I shall always hold myself more obliged to those by whose favor I enjoy uninterrupted leisure than to any who might offer me the most honorable positions in the world. Sensations are nothing but confused modes of thinking. There is nothing so strange and so unbelievable that it has not been said by one philosopher or another. I am thing that thinks, that is, a things that doubts, affirms, denies, understands a few things, is ignorant of many things, is willing, is unwilling, and also which imagines and has sensory perceptions. We call infinite that thing whose limits we have not perceived, and so by that word we do not signify what we understand about a thing, but rather what we do not understand. Because reason is the only thing that makes us men and distinguishes us from the beasts, I would prefer to believe that it exists, in its entirety, in each of us. Although my knowledge grows more and more, nevertheless I do not for that reason believe that it can ever be actually infinite, since it can never reach a point so high that it will be unable to attain any greater increase. Thus each truth discovered was a rule available in the discovery of subsequent ones. Common sense is the best distributed thing in the world, for we all think we possess a good share of it. So blind is the curiosity by which mortals are possessed, that they often conduct their minds along unexplored routes, having no reason to hope for success, but merely being willing to risk the experiment of finding whether the truth they seek lies there. I did not imitate the skeptics who doubt only for doubting's sake, and pretend to be always undecided. On the contrary, my whole intention was to arrive at a certainty, and to dig away the drift and the sand until I reached the rock or the clay beneath. On the one hand, I have a clear and distinct idea of myself, in so far as I am a thinking, non-extended thing, and on the other hand, I have a distinct idea of body, in so far this is simply an extended, non-thinking thing. And, accordingly, it is certain that I am really distinct from my body, and exist without it. But I cannot forget that, at other times, I have been deceived in sleep by similar illusions, and, attentively considering those cases, I perceive so clearly that there exist no certain marks by which the state of waking can ever be distinguished from sleep, that I feel greatly astonished, and in amazement I almost persuade myself that I am now dreaming. For each of us there is a set limit to our intellectual powers which we cannot pass. I am accustomed to sleep and in my dreams to imagine the same things that lunatics imagine when awake. Human wisdom remains always one and the same although applied to the most diverse objects, and it is no more changed by their diversity than the sunshine is changed by the variety of objects which it illuminates. I experienced in myself a certain capacity for judging which I have doubtless received from God, like all the other things that I possess, and as He could not desire to deceive me, it is clear that He has not given me a faculty that will lead me to err if I use it aright. This result could have been achieved either by His endowing my intellect with a clear and distinct perception of everything about which I would ever deliberate, or simply by impressing the following rule so firmly upon my memory that I could never forget it: I should never judge anything that I do not clearly and distinctly understand. As I considered the matter carefully, it gradually came to light that all those matters only were referred to mathematics in which order and measurements are investigated, and that it makes no difference whether it be in numbers, figures, stars, sounds, or any other object that the question of measurement arises. I saw consequently that there must be some general science to explain that element as a whole, which gives rise to problems about order and measurement, restricted as these are to no special subject matter. This, I perceived, was called universal mathematics. Good sense is the most equitably distributed of all things, because no matter how much or little a person has, everyone feels so abundantly provided with good sense that he feels no desire for more than he already possesses. I am thinking, therefore I exist. I was a substance whose whole essence or nature is solely to think, and which does not require any place or depend on any material thing in order to exist. Accordingly, this I, that is, the soul by which I am what I am, is entirely distinct from the body, and indeed is easier to know than the body, and would not fail to be whatever it is, even if the body did not exist. Be that as it may, there is fixed in my mind a certain opinion of long standing, namely that there exists a God who is able to do anything, and by whom I, such as I am, have been created. How do I know that he did not bring it about that there is no earth at all, no heavens, no extended thing, no shape, no size, no place, and yet bringing it about that all these things appear to me to exist precisely as they do now? For how do we know that the thoughts which occur in dreaming are false rather than those others which we experience when awake, since the former are often not less vivid and distinct than the latter? Moral certainty is certainty which is sufficient to regulate our behavior, or which measures up to the certainty we have on matters relating to the conduct of life, which we never normally doubt, though we know that it is possible, absolutely speaking, that they may be false. Archimedes, that he might transport the entire globe, demanded only a point that was firm and immovable, so also I shall be entitled to entertain the highest expectations, if I am fortunate enough to discover only one thing that is certain and indubitable. If I go for the alternative which is false, then obviously I shall be in error. If I take the other side, then it is by chance that I arrive at the truth, and I shall still be at fault. In this incorrect use of free will may be found the privation which constitutes the essence of error. Everybody thinks himself so well supplied with common sense that even those most difficult to please never desire more of it than they already have. If we possessed a thorough knowledge of all the parts of the seed of any animal, we could from that alone, be reasons entirely mathematical and certain, deduce the whole conformation and figure of each of its members, and, conversely, if we knew several peculiarities of this conformation, we would from those deduce the nature of its seed. There is a difference between happiness, the supreme good, and the final end or goal toward which our actions ought to tend. For happiness is not the supreme good, but presupposes it, being the contentment or satisfaction of the mind which results from possessing it. It cannot be denied that he has had many exceptional ideas, and that he is a highly intelligent man. For my part, however, I have always been taught to take a broad overview of things, in order to be able to deduce from them general rules, which might be applicable elsewhere. I should consider that I know nothing about physics if I were able to explain only how things might be, and were unable to demonstrate that they could not be otherwise. Hence reason also demands that, since our thoughts cannot all be true because we are not wholly perfect, what truth they do possess must inevitably be found in the thoughts we have when awake, rather than in our dreams. If I found any new truths in the sciences, I can say that they follow from, or depend on, 5 or 6 principal problems which I succeeded in solving and which I regard as so many battles where the fortunes of war were on my side. The rainbow is such a remarkable phenomenon of nature, and its cause has been so meticulously sought after by inquiring minds throughout the ages, that I could not choose a more appropriate subject for demonstrating how, with the method I am using, we can arrive at knowledge not possessed at all by those whose writings are available to us. The nature of matter, or body considered in general, consists not in its being something which is hard or heavy or colored, or which affects the senses in any way, but simply in its being something which is extended in length, breadth, and depth. The entire method consists in the order and arrangement of the things to which the mind's eye must turn so that we can discover some truth. It must not be thought that it is ever possible to reach the interior earth by any perseverance in mining, both because the exterior earth is too thick in comparison with human strength, and especially because of the intermediate waters, which would gush forth with greater impetus the deeper the place in which their veins were first opened, and which would drown all miners. Good sense is, of all things among men, the most equally distributed, for every one thinks himself so abundantly provided with it, that those even who are the most difficult to satisfy in everything else, do not usually desire a larger measure of this quality than they already possess. Common sense is the most fairly distributed thing in the world, for each one thinks he is so well endowed with it that even those who are hardest to satisfy in all other matters are not in the habit of desiring more of it than they already have. I concluded that I might take as a general rule the principle that all things which we very clearly and obviously conceive are true, only observing, however, that there is some difficulty in rightly determining the objects which we distinctly conceive.